First and foremost, I don't want to hear anybody continue to construe this as just an unfortunate event, even though I understand why people are saying that. We need to say this very clearly. The BAFTAs did this on purpose. The British Academy of Film and Theatre did this on purpose. The award show did this on purpose. And the reasons why they did this on purpose can be varying. Even the degree to which you can construe that purposefulness can be varying, because maybe it wasn't conscious. Maybe it was subconscious. Maybe it was as simple as, this will be a heartening moment for us to have a difficult discourse or to grapple with something difficult. Maybe that's how they construed it consciously. But subconsciously or otherwise, what happened on Sunday was a classic colonizer tool. It's not even advanced colonizer technology. It's a classic colonizer tool. It's not simple distraction. It's not simple entertainment. It is the classic case of divide and conquer. I'm not going to say it worked, hook, line, and sinker, but a lot of people have fallen into that because it's extremely traumatizing and extremely triggering what happened. And I do not want to place blame squarely at the feet of John Davidson, the white man with Tourette's, who we'll be talking about in a second. Obviously, this is not just a situation in which black people were racially traumatized, frankly, in front of probably millions of people. This was not just a racist situation, but it was an ableist situation. It was a situation that set up multiple perceived communities, perceived categories of marginalized people for tremendous hurt and trauma. And that was done with a kind of callousness. Whether or not you think it was somebody twirling a mustache or whether or not you think it was incidental, it was a callous colonial tool. Yakubian technology, okay? I want to say also firmly that we are going to be talking about Tourette's today. We're going to be talking about what involuntary tics are, and we're going to be consulting voices that do not get placed at the center of this conversation. We're going to be looking at black folks with Tourette's, sometimes content creators, elected officials even. But it's exactly what Celine Dion just said. It used ableism to be racist, and that's what colonizers do. Colonizers don't give a fuck about marginalized people as far as they can throw them. That is what these institutions do. That is what the ruling class does. That is what the supporters of the ruling class do. They don't care about marginalized people as far as they can throw them. And so when they do care as far as they can throw them, they throw them at other marginalized people. They don't care about ableism. These folks do not care about ableism. They use ableism as a tool to execute other colonial agendas. They don't care about ableism when it kills disabled folks in public service. They don't care about ableism when it leaves people unhoused and on the streets. They don't care about when disabled folks are, discriminated against all across these different institutions. They don't care about having disabled folks taking part in their process for elections, for selecting different candidates, for nominations, for selecting winners. They don't care about consistently providing accommodations for disabled people. Clearly, what they care about is manipulating you into thinking it's one or the other. I can only care about black folks who necessarily are able-bodied. As a matter of fact, black folks are always the most able-bodied in the colonial mind because they're the people who can take the most trauma. That's their role in society. And I can't stand with them and also disabled people who are almost always white in our minds. They use this when it didn't have to be this bad. And we'll start here. This was a Variety piece that came out yesterday by Clayton Davis, who's a Puerto Rican black writer. He says BAFTA and the BBC failed us all. Host Alan Cumming, who is a very good actor, paused the ceremony to thank the audience for its understanding after a series of audible outbursts from Tourette's campaigner John Davidson interrupted the show. One of those outbursts, heard while Sinners stars Michael B. Jordan and Delroy Lindo were on stage, included the N-word. This happened multiple times, right? A Academy Award winner and the person who was involved in the creation of Sinners, Hannah Beachler, said that it happened 3 times that night. One of the 3 times was directed at her on the way to dinner after the show. Now, as you may know, but some of you apparently really don't know, Tourette's syndrome involves a spectrum of different symptoms, but typically tics, and those tics can include involuntary vocal outbursts. Alan Cumming said, "You may have noticed some strong language in the background there. This can be a part of how Tourette's syndrome shows up for some people as the film explores that experience." Now, this was a tape-delayed broadcast. And the first way in which people have been critiquing BAFTA is because of their decision or apparent mistake, because now I think there is a piece that just came out. I'm recording this on February 24th, piece just came out saying, oh, the executives wanted to take it out, but it wasn't taken out for some reason. Okay, sure. All right. Regardless, they didn't take it out despite the fact that there was a tape delay, a multiple hour tape delay, which exists for the purpose of editing the footage before broadcasting it. So you had hours to edit footage with the specific purpose of removing content that would offend folks, that would cause controversy, so to speak. This is the same logic through which there was outrage for Bob Dylan, the artist last year who made statements about the liberation of Palestine. This year, they're like, we're not going to let that happen. And yet the N-word came through, clear as day. Not only that, we saw Michael B. Jordan and Delroy Lindo, 2 actors from Sinners, have to stand there and watch the N-word get belted at them. Not only that, but we have the impression that this was the extent to which folks were warned. Delroy Lindo made a statement afterwards saying, I wish somebody would have came and talked to me after this happened. Which now the BAFTAs are like, we contacted folks immediately afterwards. That's not what Delroy Lindo said. Clearly they contacted folks afterward, but only insofar as trying to clean up the situation. And just as RuQ77 says, they censored out pro-Palestine stuff. Specifically, Akinola Davis Jr., a black director, made a statement in his speech saying Free Palestine. That was edited out. Most of his speech was left in. Just the part of the speech in which he mentioned Free Palestine was taken out. He had also mentioned Sudan and the Congo. They took that out, but you don't want to take out the N-word being hurled at people. This is very obviously callous. I'm simply not buying the idea that, oh, we just fumbled this at the 1 yard. Oh, we had no idea what to do. Because if you didn't know what to do, then you needed to stop what you were doing. And you needed to clarify the situation. Do you understand what I'm saying? If you didn't know what you were doing, that is a damning indictment on your supposed allyship with disabled people. Because you just allowed for multiple instances of severe harm towards different people. You allowed for that, all for the sake of this idea of I'm including this disabled person, but you didn't really include them because you allowed them to be humiliated. You allowed them to cause this disproportionate amount of harm towards people with Tourette's. You know, you're trying to honor this film made by this Tourette's campaigner or with the support of this Tourette's campaigner about his life to bring awareness and bring education about Tourette's. And meanwhile, you did the complete opposite. Anybody in a situation like that who's genuinely trying to advocate for a cause, and this is the result, the level of embarrassment, the level of shame and pain that they would be feeling would be so palpable. You would have to stop the show. But everything was proceeded business as usual. Very mild statements were made by Alan Cumming. Very mild statements were made from the BAFTAs. Oh, we should have taken the word out. How did you let this happen? And this is what happens when you allow these institutions to seize on these ideas of inclusion and diversity. It's fake. It's a ruse. Because what is inclusion without accommodation? So let me tell you why they really did this. Because we're not buying these excuses. They did this, I think, primarily because they knew it would get people talking, so to speak. Classic TV logic. Classic broadcasting logic. It gets people talking. Maybe they justify it as like it spreads awareness. Maybe they use that classic liberal logic of, well, it just shows, how black people are able to have grace and poise under pressure. Fuck that. These are all still excuses for the core rationality, which is we care more about or exclusively about causing discourse around our media, around our show, in order to get people talking, in order to bring attention, etc. But that's not it. That's not all that it is either. It's not just we want clout. The same way that some 14-year-old on YouTube will say slurs for clout. The same way that, somebody at your school will continue to cause drama for clout. It's not the same. This kind of clout seeking, clout chasing, this kind of discourse creation has a purpose. And that purpose is dissension. Not dissension with the system, but dissension with other parts of society. More clearly, that purpose is causing fights. They want to cause fights. One of the best things that you can do in order to get people talking about your media and keep it relevant is to make people fight over it. But it's not even just about the media. Because when we see the nature of the fights happening, we can clearly see that there's a level of harm that is being allowed to be perpetuated here. It was very obvious what white people were going to do, for instance. This is just one example of numerous exchanges to this effect that happened on Reddit and other social media platforms. Poor guy, hope he's doing okay. In reference to John Davidson. What about the 2 men who heard racial slurs? I hope they are sensible enough to understand the man and his condition and not take offense, unlike many people in this thread. And of course the classic, the men and the whole planet hear racial slurs every fucking day. Listen to 90% of rap music for a start. The idea that something negative happened to black people is simply unconscionable. Why? Because we just weaponize ableism against them. So they have no space with which they can be offended. They have no space with which they can shed tears. They can't be hurt. Harm cannot have been done to them because harm doesn't happen to black people because they're not human, right? These are the classic logics over and over again. It was very obvious that this is what was going to happen when your inclusion, in quotation marks, of disabled folks is putting white disabled folks in situations without accommodation so that they can harm black people and then wiping your hands clean of it. That's exactly what you are allowing to do. That's exactly what you are facilitating, and you do it on purpose. You do it on purpose. Meanwhile, on the other end, black folks expressing outrage, and then you have celebrities like Jamie Foxx doing so while being ableist. Foxx commented below a post about the incident on social media saying unacceptable and nah, he meant that shit. Jamie Foxx, famous actor, famous singer. Nah, he meant that shit. Complete ignorance, illiteracy, ableism. Anybody who knows anything about Tourette's knows that these things happen involuntarily. And at the same time, of course, this is the reaction that's going to get magnified, especially by people whose idea of pro-blackness was never going to include pro-black disabled people, was never going to include deconstructing ableism at that level, right? Getting caught in the heat of a moment, perpetuating ableist rhetoric to battle against racism. It's such classic divide and conquer that you can't be serious to think that it's not intentional. It's intentional, especially because this happened in Britain. Do you understand what I'm talking about? Like, do you understand what I'm saying here? This happened in Britain. This is the British Academy Film Awards. What happened in British India? It is a classic part of South Asian education that the British Raj frequently, this is from Wikipedia, I'm not even doing deep research here, frequently used this tactic to consolidate their rule and prevent the emergence of the Indian independence movement. Wedging differences between Hindus and Muslims, wedging differences between people of different castes, wedging differences between people of different skin colors. All differences that already appeared and biases and violences that might have already appeared in Indian society, magnified even subconsciously through mere rigorous classification. You take systems that already exist in societies, you take sociological phenomena that already exist in a colony, and you turn it into rigorous classification. Well, this is a Brahmin and this is an untouchable. This is where Muslims are, this is what Hindus are. And you give certain people, certain categories, all the attention, so to speak. In this case, promotion into the military, power in the political apparatus. You give them that power. You segment others. And then the others who are segmented away are looking around and saying, well, why are these people getting so much power? These people are wielding their power against us. And now they fight each other. Like clockwork. And as Crunchy Skull says, as a Brit, we get taught basically nothing about this, or at least 30% of the atrocities. That is how colonization works. That is how the imperial colonial entity works, right? I'm not trying to speak over your head here, but do you really think that this doesn't have anything to do with dominating people? One of the effects of things like this is that then you have black marginalized folks, disabled black folks, whose identity is essentially being questioned because there are many black folks who have Tourette's. And the idea that somebody is having Tourette's and then somebody is black and then they both have competing interests and they're fighting against each other necessarily relegates those black folks with Tourette's to scraps. It necessarily negates their existence. And so one of the things we're going to do today is we're going to engage with black folks who have Tourette's. And thankfully, we had multiple instances of folks on social media commenting about this. We'll start here with Janelle Bean.
So I've made videos about this in the past. This comment is from a video that I made 3 years ago that is kind of active again because I talked about coprolalia, which is the tic in Tourette syndrome that causes people to say obscene things, socially inappropriate things, culturally inappropriate things. I've seen a lot of discourse and I just kind of want to bring some education and shed some light. Similarly, I guess the top 3 things that I've repeatedly been seeing that I'd like to give my input about is number 1, a lot of people are saying that it seemed like that was the only time that John Davidson ticked, right when it was silent and right when it was perfect for him to say the N-word. That was the only time he ticked. Obviously, I was not there to see if he ticked throughout the rest of the show or not, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's true.
And we can confirm, like I mentioned earlier, that that's not true. He had ticked multiple times before in the night. Which, of course, right? Did the BAFTAs give people this kind of education about what happened? Did they put a PSA up during the show? Did they edit out the one instance that was captured of him doing it during the filming of the ceremony. Did they edit it out? No, they didn't. Why? Because they want you talking about it a certain way.
A lot of times there might be motor tics that are going on, which is movement that we might not see because obviously the camera is elsewhere throughout the show. There might have been other vocal tics that he had said that were a bit more muffled. He might have gotten up and gone to the bathroom to let out a bunch of tics in the bathroom before coming back.
This is a lived reality for many folks who have these tics, right? And I can't confirm because I try to do research on this, and a lot of the articles currently being published are essentially just going over the basics and going over the discourse and posting certain social media takes about it. But I heard somebody say that a representative at the BAFTA said that John Davidson had to excuse himself to the bathroom multiple times out of a sense of, I gotta try to contain this. Which, if that's true, or whatever else may have happened, that is clear evidence that there was not proper accommodation for this person. There was not proper accommodation for this person. How fucking dare you sit here and try to act like you're honoring people with Tourette's, and you can't even allow a person the kinds of accommodations to where they don't have to constantly make judgment calls for themselves as to how they can contain their own tics. Do you understand how messed up that is? Instead of having an expert on hand to be like, hey, I'm noticing this and this, I'm going to make a judgment call. We have a room that we can take you in, and that can be coordinated ahead of time with John Davidson. So it's not just something being pushed on him, but something he can make the decision about alongside of them. The fact that that wasn't hammered down beforehand is, as Crunchy Skull just says, is gross and cruel. But the grossness and the cruelty is the point. It's the point, right? Because the point is to sit there and make everybody uncomfortable at this disabled person. The point is to sit there and play chicken and to have people go, hold back their discomfort and sit there in silence while this situation continues to worsen, and then go, oh, look at how civilized we are afterwards. Oh, look at how civilized we are. It's classic European shit. And by the way, all of this is, again, very, very revelatory for my Europeans are more racist than Americans agenda. That is a separate conversation we could potentially have. But a lot of y'all who seem to think that anti-blackness is this like United States only phenomenon, or where it exists in other countries, it's nowhere near as problematic or as embedded in the system. That's a clear indication itself that you guys are even less capable of handling anti-blackness and tamping it down in your own societies. But moreover, here's more and more evidence. This is the type of shit they do to black people in Britain. This is the type of shit they do to black people in Britain. This is the type of shit that they do to black people in Europe. And this is the type of shit that they do to disabled folks. Ask disabled folks in Europe, in the United Kingdom, for instance, about accommodations in the United Kingdom, about, accessibility in the United Kingdom. It's piss poor. Cyber Ninja refers to it as playing footsies with the situation. They played footsies with it. They took all the credit for, we have this disabled person here, see? And they made all these people uncomfortable. And then they incited all of this outrage as a response so that they can hold that dignified stance with Alan Cumming as the voice box of, look at how much better we are than you because of how inclusive we are. It seems like, maybe we're the really inclusive people, and you rabble, you'll never get it. These black people, they're not actually educated. They don't actually care about liberation. They don't actually care about marginalization. They're just selfish, This is what they do. No, it's pivotal that this is how you register this. It's fully intentional, and it's intentional with the purpose of dividing and conquering. It's literally pivotal that you register it as that. In the case of an institution like the BAFTAs, dividing and conquering means dividing these different marginalized groups so that they can be held as the central power that can bring those people together under the guise of honoring their institutions with the purpose of propping up Britain and the British Empire, right? So to speak, the British royal family, the British government, the international imperial entity, all this shit. They are the ones who maintain the power over us because we can't see it for ourselves among each other. You keep us divided.
I know I've done that, and I know a lot of my friends with Tourette syndrome have done that as well. So we don't necessarily know. And sitting there and assuming that that's the only time he ticked is also giving the impression that you're assuming that he did it on purpose, which brings me to my second point. A lot of people are saying they understand that, Tourette syndrome is involuntary and he can't control it, but he shouldn't have said that. That's conflicting. You are now saying that you don't understand what involuntary and uncontrollable means because you cannot control it.
So it's the same logic as, these marginalized people that they take these positions of power over my marginalized group. They shouldn't do that. right? Even when you concede to the idea that they're being coerced to do it by systems of control, by people in power. In the British Raj, it's like looking at a privileged group, a privileged caste in India, taking up certain positions of power and saying, well, these people obviously are doing something wrong. But the whole point is that they are being pushed to do it. And the focus has to remain on the institution. And that is a grave mistake that a lot of people make, which is the intention. The intention is that you make the mistake of blaming the other marginalized person, put in a difficult situation, and hyper-focusing on his responsibility and his shortcomings, his personality, rather than the fact that the system set it up to make everybody in that situation lose.
Now, I completely understand the complexity and duality of the situation of, John Davidson having this tic, and even though it was unintentional, involuntary, it's still being harmful. Obviously, as a Black woman, I get it, especially in the times that we are in, politically and just in our world today. 100% understand that the intention doesn't mean that the harm or the hurt wasn't there. 100% understand that concept, which is why I feel that we should be focusing on the BAFTAs editing team as to why that was kept. Because I learned that they are pre-recorded earlier in the day.
And we got into that. And I think this also raises a big red flag about the nature of liberal institutions and the blatant hypocrisy of liberal thought, white liberal thought especially, white moderate thought. Because you remember Black Lives Matter, and you remember all these points that people have made, white folks have made over the years to show that they're listening and learning, and that they recognize that white privilege is a thing, or that racism is a thing, and that they stand up against racism, they don't tolerate it, right? And one of the central things that we established that took forever for people to get, and most people, or a lot of people, still try not to get. I do mean try not to get. But one of the things that we've established that a lot of white people will tell you is, violence isn't just violence. Harm isn't just harm. Words are harmful because words can create harm for other people. They create violence and they maintain violence towards other people. Just like in the instance of if you allow somebody to be insulted at school every day and bullied at school every day, that's violence. Even though he's not being hit. He's not being hit yet. She's not being hit yet. But she's being clearly told that she's in danger and that she is lesser. And she's operating in that environment as, I gotta keep my head down. I am in danger. I am lesser. I am not accepted here. Nobody's going to protect me. And everybody says, yeah, that's violence. That's violence. Violence isn't just when you hit people. Harm isn't just when you hit people. Okay, now prove it. Because if this was a situation where this person's disability led to him inflicting physical harm on other people, which can sometimes be the case for certain disabilities, certain disorders, would you still be having this conversation of, oh, well, you have to just sit there and take it? If he just starts spitting on people or hitting people because he's having an episode, you just have to kind of sit there and pretend it's not happening because that's inclusion. No, everybody would understand this is harm being done. It's not his fault. We got to keep everybody safe. But when it's screaming the N-word, when it's screaming racial slurs at people, it's still being discussed as, oh, well, it's about how you take it. It's about how you approach it. It's about how you rise above your situation and understanding. So then there's no harm in saying the N-word. That's what you're saying. The N-word is harmless. And this is the reality of what a lot of white people think. This is the reality of how whiteness works. They lie to you. White people lie to you over and over again, telling you that they get it. They don't get it. They don't get it because if they actually thought that racism is violent, that racism is harmful, and that it has to be treated as such, then they would all get it immediately. Okay, so we've got to find a way to keep this situation a lot safer. We've got to do something to remedy the harm that's been done. I'm telling you, the only sensible, and a lot of people will say, well, what do you want them to do? What do you want them to do? What do you want them to do? Do you want them to just exclude him? Should he just not be able to show up at all? That's bait. That's bait, because unless you are a disability coordinator with strong expertise in this area, you are not going to have the proper response. You're not going to have the best response more often than not. If you do, you're lucky. They're baiting you to solve something that it shouldn't be your job to solve. It should be the job of people who have trained in order to handle this situation to propose those solutions, as well as doing so in coordination with the person himself. That is how accommodations work. But none of you understand accommodations, right? You think accommodating a disabled person is essentially nothing. It's invisible, or it's essentially just pretending that they're not disabled. That is the opposite of accommodating a disabled person. That is just another form of bullying a disabled person, pretending like the disability doesn't do what it does. But that's the thing. They don't actually care about ableism. They will sit there and tell you, oh, I feel so bad for him. Oh, it's so hard for people with Tourette's. But they don't actually care about people with Tourette's because they're not actually trying to remedy the situation. If something like this happens, the overwhelming conclusion that should be come to is this was an abject failure. We failed. Everybody involved in the decision-making process here failed, and harm was done. Significant harm was done. Not just to Michael B. Jordan, Delroy, Lindo, but every black person in that room, every marginalized person in that room, and all the black people watching, as well as every person with Tourette's was harmed by this. So we've got to figure out who can we get money to, where can we donate, who do we reach out to, how do we facilitate a new conversation about it. Like, we got to put our money where our mouth is to remedy the harm, and then next time make sure that never happens again. And be very transparent in the process of showing, here's what we're figuring out. We made mistakes. This is what we're going to do next time. Or this is what can be done. All this shit. But no, it's just, oh, unfortunate. Oh, so unfortunate. Oh, we're so sorry that that happened. No, you're not. You're not sorry about anything at all. And that's, again, proof that they do this shit on purpose. They do it on purpose. The idea is to make you think that black disabled people do not exist. So let's look at more black disabled people.
Ignore how I look right now. Critical retention. I am not feeling too great. However, there is something I have been asked to talk about, and that is going to be the BAFTA situation. I have been seeing a bunch of outrage about it, people saying, oh, well, why would that even be in his vocabulary? He did that on purpose and all of this stuff, and that racism is to excuse. A very bitch sad day for the Tourette syndrome community, especially for the ones that have coprolalia, because when you come online and you see thousands of people hating on your condition, specifically coprolalia, because that's something that is already very embarrassing for all of us. I'm not going to say that people can't be offended by the fact that somebody said the N-word as a tick. However, it's not something that somebody can control. It's not something that somebody wants to say. And I've been seeing a lot of people be like, well, he said it like when the crowd went silent. That is most likely when a tick is going to happen when you're in public, when you're in.
So you get the picture here, and I think this person, is really worth checking out as well as Janelle Bean. And unfortunately, they had to put up a statement, right? Saying that they couldn't make a video because they're sick and in pain, but that they saw that people have used their videos on Twitter. They saw that people are using their videos on Twitter as a way to be racist. They explained Tourette's and coprolalia in deep detail. And they stated clearly that the presenters and Ryan Coogler and everybody involved deserves apologies, right? The apologies should be private, not public. It was purposely publicized by BAFTA. That's their take.
I'm going to be abundantly clear and tell you all that
This is Crutches and Spice. And Crutches and Spice is a black disability activist.
I'm going to be abundantly clear and tell you all that I resent multiple people in this fucking conversation. I resent a lot of people. I resent people that act like black disabled people don't exist until a white person says something racist that includes everybody involved. Okay, I also resent the people that seem to fucking care about ableism, all of a sudden once racial slurs are said, but don't care about it when it comes to institutionalizing disabled people or legislating away their reproductive rights.
And, just for the interest of time, Crutches and Spice, as part of this TikTok, also makes very important points. That's Amani Barberin, yeah. Makes really important points about the lack of accommodations, just like I'm saying, right? A lot of my points here about accommodations were informed by Crutches and Spice's takes about how this could have been handled, prevented, how much of the harm could have been reduced at the very least. But that wasn't done because it wasn't seen as necessary, because it's not seen as harm when you racially abuse black people. It's not seen as harm. Black people are frequently, constantly viewed as most tolerant of all problems. They are viewed as necessarily having to rise above all the problems that they face, because that's life. Racism is still being manipulated as this defect of certain people's personalities, that a person should use their esteem and their self-esteem and their couth in order to rise above, and not harm. Because if somebody's punching you in the face, you can't just rise above that. You have to actually address being punched in the face. But being called the N-word and being excluded and being ignored and manipulated and gaslit, that's not harm, according to these institutions. Still, they lie to us again and again and again. They say they care about diversity and inclusion. But the BAFTAs are the perfect example of how they're always full of shit, right? Just a few years ago, this is Joaquin Phoenix 6 years ago, who made a very clear point of addressing systemic racism. He won the Best Actor prize at the BAFTAs over 6 years ago and said he felt conflicted because so many of my fellow actors who are deserving don't have that same privilege. We send a very clear message to people of color that you're not welcome here. This is 2019. Then in response to this and the BAFTAs So White campaign, because you remember Oscars So White, right? The BAFTAs So White campaign that also emerged in the wake of that. You had a person who was brought in to be part of the BAFTA diversity scheme said that the casting director for it made racist comments to her. India Eva Ray, selected for BAFTA's Elevate program, alleges she was subsequently threatened by a mentor to not speak out about the comments. She joined BAFTA's Elevate program in 2019, around the same period of time when they're talking about, oh, diversity, oh, BAFTA's so white, we want to address that. We're listening, we're learning, we're incorporating. And they bring this Indian woman in, and they have the casting director who tells her that she's an exotic talent and can't understand the English coming out of her mouth. And then the mentor on the scheme told her and other members of the group that they will never work again if they speak up. And so if you remember when I mentioned Bob Villain earlier in this program, earlier in this recording, Bob Villain had to talk about this. And I think they put it pretty succinctly and point to some very, very obvious correlations here with why this racist shit keeps happening.
Yesterday, I was busy, so I couldn't make the BAFTAs. But anywhere you find the apparently newly cautious BBC, you will find me there in spirit. The BAFTA Awards took place last night after cautious security planning and editorial practices and guidelines were put in place to curb any political statements and language that people may find offensive. Apparently, somebody ruined it for everybody last year.
Shut the fuck up!
But why then is it that the shouting of a racial slur by a white man with Tourette's syndrome whilst two black actors, Michael B. Jordan and Delroy Lindo, were on stage presenting an award, managed to make the final TV edit?
For a vital part of movie making.
Whilst Akinola Davies Jr., a black director accepting an award later that night, had his statement of Free Palestine cut from the final TV edit.
For Nigeria, for London, the Congo, Sudan, Free Palestine, thank you.
And this is where he starts to get into
points
points that
racially
are
insensitive or
what I'm talking about
discriminatory
here.
and is actually a very mild humanitarian call for freedom. Now, I'm aware of the symptoms of Tourette's syndrome, so what I'm really concerned with is not the actions of a man with a very complicated neurological condition, but the decision by a broadcasting company embroiled in scandals to leave that racial slur in the final edit, but remove a call for freedom, which means even after all of their preemptive planning for censorship, a decision was made to leave one and remove the other. Now, could it be that they left it in with the desire to highlight the complex nature and reality of living with Tourette's syndrome in daily life? Doubtful. Could it be another BBC blunder? Could it be that black people are just fair game to the BBC? Always. But could it be something far more sinister? Could it be that the BBC is not really concerned with censorship at all unless it threatens the image of Israel and their ability to carry out genocide unchallenged? One of the key board members of the BBC, Robbie Gibb, has not only acted as an editorial advisor for the right-wing news outlet GB News, but in 2020 led a consortium to buy the Jewish Chronicle, a newspaper that continuously protects the actions of the Israeli state, war crimes and all. A man that you will remember survived calls for his removal from the board in 2025 after more than 400 media figures signed a letter to the BBC urging them to remove him over impartiality concerns following the BBC's decision not to air the documentary Gaza, Doctors Under Attack.
So these are the real tangible material ways that you can see how this imperial logic plays out, because it's so easy for people to dismiss you and act like you're just a conspiracy theorist when you say, oh, this was intentional, oh, this was imperial, this is colonial, this is the colonizers being colonizers, right? But it factually is, because you have a board that defends and maintains its membership of a person who is a far-right interlocutor who was responsible for buying or for saving a Zionist publication. There is clear investment from the BBC, as we see from when they edit out the Free Palestine part of a speech. The clear focus, the impetus above anything else, above protecting people, diversity, racism, anything. What they care about is protecting empire. And right now, Empire really needs to make its messaging about genocide very clear, that they support it, that this isn't genocide, that it's actually just your lying eyes. They do that on purpose. So you cannot tell me that this is conspiratorial thinking. You cannot tell me that this is just an unfortunate incident. And I really hate that it's being whittled down to that. I really hate that the takeaway for so many people is just, oh, how cringe, how hard this is. Oh, this is, I understand it fully, because that is ultimately what it is in a lot of ways. But when we talk about it that way, we talk about it as if it's this inevitability that just happens to happen, that just has to happen in a society where Black people exist, and in a society when disability, exists. This just has to happen. It's just not avoidable. It's just part for the course. It's just par for the course. That is the logic that you have to resist. You have to remember that this is intentional. They are trying to get you to believe that inclusion necessitates harm, that one marginalized group is necessarily harmful towards others, that white people, that people in white establishments and white institutions, that white ruling class people are the most civilized, are the most intelligent, and that any time these kinds of things take place within their institutions, within their ceremonies, in the public eye, and it happens many times, but anytime that happens, it's just an unfortunate reality. It's just kinks in the system, flaws in the system that we just gotta tweak. That's the lie. This was intentional. The BBC did this on purpose. BAFTA did this on purpose, okay? Even in the case when we look at divide and rule historically in Britain, a lot of the time it wasn't somebody specifically saying, haha, we'll divide the Muslims and the fucking Hindus. It wasn't necessarily always that. It was sometimes subtle. It was oftentimes unsaid. A lot of people you couldn't pin directly to those intentions, although a lot of people you could. A lot of people wrote about it, who are part of the British Empire, wrote about it actively, who are part of the British military, right? It was a key part of how they partitioned Palestine, is by waging inter-Arab wars, fracturing inter-Arab solidarity. This is what they do. And the last thing that I'll say kind of relates to what Lady Gray just said. I want to talk about the apology that didn't happen. I don't want to hammer this home. We're just going to mention this quickly at the end. Also because I wanted to bring some attention to this Twitter user, Twitchy Spoonie, who also has content on other platforms, has been talking about this a lot and has made mention of how John Davidson and his activism has been helpful for folks like her. But when we look at this statement that John Davidson made, there's an emphasis about how his involuntary tics were intentional. They don't carry any meaning. He was heartened by the round of applause that followed the announcement that was made about it. He feels deeply mortified if anyone considers his involuntary tics to be intentional or to carry any meaning, that he has always, tried to support and empower the Tourette's community, and that he chose to leave the auditorium early into the ceremony as he was aware of the distress his tics were causing. And what Twitchy Spoonie says is essentially like, this doesn't reveal a robust understanding of racism, which is something that she and other Black Tourette's activists, right? Other Black folks with Tourette's are advocating against. They speak often about, and this is something you can see across different disability communities and different disability advocacy groups, is dominated by white people. And it's dominated by white people who think that their fight to justly include and educate about a disability precludes them from understanding how that disability might have other, consequences, precludes them from understanding how that has to deal with racism and sexism and queerphobia. She says, he understands this word causes distress, but he never took the time to fully understand and account for the impact of him taking the N-word. And we don't know if he privately apologized to Michael B. Jordan, Delroy Lindo.
Hi, this is Editing Elliot, and as a matter of fact, we did get reports that John Davidson did in fact apologize or reached out to Warner Bros. To attempt to apologize to Michael B. Jordan and Delroy Lindo privately. So that was what I was concerned about with regards to jumping to conclusions about his public statement.
That's why it's private, right? This also does not mean that he intentionally ticked a slur. That is far from the point. And I also really am trying to lead with empathy here, just in the sense that this was a horrible thing that happened to him. This is a horrible thing that happened to him too, and happened to all folks with Tourette's too. But the point is, this is what we get. But to me, what this is colonialism. It's a clear sign, top down, top to bottom. It's colonialism, because this is how colonialism includes the marginalized. This is how colonialism offers rewards to the marginalized. It tells them that you can have a little bit more as long as you're willing to let us use you against other people. And This is what we're not allowing to happen anymore. We need to see it very clearly for the trick that it is. We need to understand that we actually have the power to champion Black disability activists, Black Tourette's activists, that we have the possibility to bridge gaps of understanding and to recognize colonial wickedry for what it is. That's what we're going to do. I am not allowing y'all in 2026 or further on to crumble under the weight of colonial tricks. America is sitting here and reckoning with its racism because it's tearing its own country apart, tearing up its own economy, destroying life for everybody in its country and outside of its country. And the American empire is having this crisis moment in great part due to these contradictions or these realities coming home to roost. And in this moment, when it's so obvious that you can tell Donald Trump that he's racist, and it's so obvious that you can tell MAGA that they're racist, they turn back to daddy. They turn back to grandpa. And they said, Grandpa Britton, do some of the stuff that you used to do to help square these situations. And Grandpa Britton put his little cigar down, got up and said, okay, we'll do the old trick, the old divide and rule trick.